What framework do you use to judge which countries are likely to be the next breakout countries, which country will be laggards, and so on?
Yeah, I think first it's very important to define as to how I define breakout nations. So the two definitions for me are what? One, that this country should do better than what the consensus expects it to do. And this is the classic case that if China grows at 5%, now you may say 5 is still pretty good, but trust me, 5% will feel to many people like a bit of a recession when it first happens. And similar like in India's case, that the economy last year grew at less than 5%, which you may think is great, but in India that's considered a recession. So you have to first be aware about what is your expectation, or in terms of what is the general expectation, and will the country do better or worse than the general expectation. And the second factor is how it will do compared to its other peer group. If a country like Brazil or Russia grow at 6%, that's a huge achievement because their per capita income level is $12,000. If a country like India or Nigeria grow at 5%, that's okay. It needs to grow at much quicker pace. So those two are important definitions about what will be breakout nations or not. And to me, we basically have a framework of about a dozen rules or so, which we look at to figure out whether a country is on the right path or on the wrong path.
What are the first three things on your dozen rules?
Okay, yeah. I think that, one sort of thing that we look at, for example, I guess like to make this a bit more fun is something called a billionaires index, which is that I look at how many billionaires that country has relative to its overall economy. And if a country, and I look at this from a three-dimensional standpoint. One, if a country has too many billionaires relative to its GDP size, that's usually a negative sign, because it means that you have an oligarchy going on at the top and the wealth is not being spread. But take the case of Russia, for example, that the total number of billionaires in Russia as a share of the economy is about 20%. The average for emerging markets is 10%. And here's the intriguing thing, that Russia is number one in terms of total number of billionaires in the world, after the US in fact, but number one in emerging markets. But total number of millionaires in the world, Russia is not even in the top 15. So when such a big skew exists, the economy is unbalanced, because often it leads to a backlash against reforms as well, where you end up having such concentration of wealth at the top. And the two other metrics as part of the billionaires index is the churn, that you need new billionaires to keep coming up. Now you can have some old holdovers, but you need new billionaires. If the same billionaires keep repeating on the list year after year after year, that's a negative sign. It shows that the creative destruction in the economy is not really taking place in an efficient way. And the third is, from which sectors are these billionaires coming? Are they coming from genuinely productive sectors such as manufacturing, technology, or are they coming from sectors which are essentially rent seeking, which is mining, property, etc. So that's one rule to look at, which is that the billionaires in an economy and what they tell you about the state in an economy. A more technical rule, I think, has to do with the fact of credit growth. That if an economy is sort of showing excessive credit growth above its nominal GDP growth rate for 3 to 5 years, that's trouble. That eventually that's going to lead to bad debts in the system and clog the financial system for a while. So that's a thing. A third thing, again a bit more fun, which we do, is something called the Four Seasons Index, which is we get to stay at the Four Seasons hotels when we go at most of these countries. And if you go to Brazil, Russia, where you stay the equivalent of Four Seasons hotels and you take close to $1,000 a night, that's bad, because that economy is seriously uncompetitive. Whereas today, if you go to Southeast Asia, you stay in Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, you're paying about $200 to $300 a night. That's a good sign, because it shows the economy is relatively competitive. So to me, it's rules like these that you sort of do a combination of some which are academic, like the credit stuff, and some which are original to us based on our years of travel to these various emerging markets.
That's very interesting. If you apply this framework to the set of emerging markets and looking ahead, not 20 years, but 3 to 5 years, which countries are likely to be the next breakout nations?
The countries which sort of rank positively on this framework to us currently are, 3 to 5 years, because are Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, possibly Mexico, and maybe even Poland. That these sort of rank well. Now, of course, many people think that, how can these countries be great powers? I'm not saying great powers. I'm saying next 3 to 5 years that they'll be pretty, that they'll do better than what people think based on this framework, and they'll do better than other countries in their own per capita income league. So I'd say that these are some of the countries, and the countries which flash red to me are South Africa, Brazil, Russia, that they're all red when you try and do that in terms of how they score as per this matrix of these dozen rules.